On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
What's in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, in this week's episode we have got pink grasshoppers.
I really like the old credits.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a Saturday afternoon and I'm filming the new episode of On the Track, which you will get next Saturday afternoon. And we've got a house full here today. We've got Miss Karen, we've got Miss Isabel, and we've got Richard Muirhead, and we've got Archie, and I believe Peanut is around somewhere. But what's that over there?
On this week's episode in Thrills Incorporated, we've got Radio Planet and the Ant-Men.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. My name's John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that, we bring you a potpourri of hard science, weird shit, and what's the other thing? Oi, McCrinnan, what's the other thing?
Sorry, I was reading something.
Yeah, well, what's the other thing we do? Is that we do hard science, weird shit, and
Surreality.
oh yeah, surreality. And if you don't know what surreality is, check this out. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, as I expect you know anyway, one of my oldest friends, in fact probably my oldest friend, is a guy called Richard Muirhead. I met him in Hong Kong back in 1970 when he was 6, something like that.
4 or 5.
And I was 11. And we've been friends with a bit of a gap through the 70s ever since. And let's face it, most of us can't remember what we did in the 70s, so it doesn't really matter. So, Richard is one of the senior members of the Centre for Fortean Zoology. He is the commissioning editor for both the yearbook and for Animals and Men, and he keeps me happy. He's our head researcher, and he keeps me happy by sending me all sorts of peculiar stories. And the other day, as I believe you probably know, I was in hospital. I got rushed to hospital last Wednesday because they thought I was in imminent danger of having a heart attack. Actually, I wasn't, but that's another story. But I spent a couple of days in the cardiac care unit, and in the middle of that, I get one of those bings on my iPad, and I see there's a message come in, and it's from Richard Muirhead, and it is a picture of a pink grasshopper. So, Richard, tell me, what is a pink grasshopper? And don't say that it's a grasshopper that is pink. Pink on the zoa, have you ever seen a grasshopper ever so pink? It's defined by a recessive gene. It's really groovy if you know what I mean. or else I'll have to get my old mate Twink Adler on cue, and he had an album out in 1967 called Think Pink. But tell me about pink grasshoppers.
Well, there's a condition called erythrism, which is a recessive gene that can be passed down through generations.
And now may I introduce the lovely Miss Isabel, who has a visual aid. A small carnivore with erythrism. Yes, the orange cat is erythristic.
So pink grasshoppers just happen to be grasshoppers that, instead of being their normal green colour, have picked up on this recessive gene. You also occasionally get orange grasshoppers, just as you occasionally get orange or pink frogs, which were particularly reported in southwest of England in the 1990s, these orange frogs. They've got this similar recessive gene. So I came across some cases, did a bit of research on the internet and the British newspaper archive. The earliest case I found was from around about 1909, when 2 children were arrested for trespassing on a railway line, somewhere in the southeast of England. And the reason they were on the railway line was because they were looking for pink grasshoppers. Then jump forward to 2015. A report on July the 1st, 2015 was of a pink grasshopper in Salford, Greater Manchester. Then jumping forward to July the 26th, 2022, there's a case of one in Derbyshire. 2nd of August 22 in Wales, in Gwynedd. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Gwynedd, sorry. Then around the summer of this year or last year, there were 6 of these pink grasshoppers in Sparkwell, Plymouth. 4th of July this year, Anglesey, Wales. And an orange grasshopper in Leeds in July this year. So that is my roundup of British pink grasshoppers for you.
Now, something which I think is quite interesting is if you look in the early issues of 14 Times back in the 70s, it was claimed that these pink grasshoppers had been blown from the Sahara Desert along with desert sand, which does sometimes blow from North Africa, and that it had blown all the way and it brought these strange pink grasshoppers with them. But actually that's just not true. They're not brought with them. They are a genetic mutation of British species.
Yes, I'm sure I've read of a case of a pink frog that supposedly fell with Saharan dust. Again, this is not recently, we're talking at least 15, 20 years ago, but as John's just said, it's not necessary for that to be the case. These pink grasshoppers are native to the British Isles, although they are quite rare.
And it's one of these things that I personally find totally fascinating. And I know that I annoy some of the hardliners in the cryptozoological community who say, we want films about Loch Ness monsters, or we want shows about Bigfoot. And they get shows from you and me about migrant moths or weird coloured grasshoppers. But I think that this stuff is just as much grist to the Fortean mill as the more better known cryptozoological creatures.
Sure, I agree.
There are all sorts of cute stories in the annals of rock and roll music about how songs came about. And sometimes songs are laden with obscure symbolism, and other times songs just basically do what they say on the tin. And this is one of those. This is a song written for and about my dear old friend Maxine Pearson, Miss Maxine, whom I have known and loved for a quarter of a century plus now. And how, when things were happening on the global stage in Eastern Europe a few weeks ago, she found that she was unable to pronounce the name of the dictator of Belarus. This is a song called Lukashenko Maxine.
You messaged me on Facebook to tell me that you thought that I should know that the dictator of Belarus was in the hospital in Moscow. Was it time for him to go? Were they gonna give him Novichok and he ended the useless to Putin's regime? Will he be replaced by some faceless apparatchik, if you know what I mean? You're the only chick I ever met who finds politics as entertaining as I do. But you Malapop my crazy is one of the reasons that I truly love you. And you often get things wrong and it always makes me laugh. It leads me down a rabbit hole besides the garden path. And you've done it again this time, though I teach you about it. You insist that you know best. You always make me shake. Lukashenko Maxine. His name is Lukashenko Maxine. Then you came to the subject talking about rebel ants and clearing my kitchen windowsill if you get half a chance. It's Lukashenko Maxine. The situation in Eastern Europe is enduringly fascinating to folks like you and me, who find amusement from the antics of our leaders who never learn the lessons of history. This is something we can act on, we can fact on, make a pact on, but we very seldom do. So utilize it, laugh, and make bets on Armageddon, like I promised that we do. You're the only chick I ever met who finds politics as entertaining as I do. But windowsill if you get half a chance. It's Lukashenko Maxine. It's Lukashenko Maxine. His name is Lukashenko Maxine. Then you change the subject talking about rebel ants and cheering my kitchen windowsill if you get half a chance. It's Lukashenko Maxine.
So Richard, I think we have dealt satisfactorily with the subject of pink grasshoppers. What else have you got for us?
The other day I was looking at the Essex Fields Club's archival website, looking for a story of a red frog, but in fact I actually came across reports of tree frog. The Essex Naturalist, Volume 1, 1887, reported the sighting of a tree frog behind the Infant Orphan Asylum in Wanstead. It was in those days Wanstead was in Essex. I think it's now in Greater London. Anyway, tree frogs in Britain date back as far as 1646, when Sir Thomas Browne wrote about them, implying that they were quite commonplace.
Sir Thomas Browne was a wealthy Norfolk landowner of the 17th century, and I've often wondered whether he was acquainted with another wealthy Norfolk landowner at the same time. This man was called John Downes, and he's gone down in history as a notorious fellow because he was the youngest man to be one of the signatories to King Charles I's death warrant. And he's gone down in history as Downes the Regicide. And he was a distant ancestor of mine.
Jumping backwards, they reported in 1849 at a place called St. Lawrence Undercliff on the Isle of Wight.
Richard, I can imagine it. Well, I know because I've seen it, a frog jumping forwards. But how do you have a frog that jumps backwards?
In more recent times, they've been reported in Devon, the New Forest near Bewley, and southeast London. So it's quite possible that the tree frog has actually been a part of our native species, although it's been overlooked because it's been reported in more than one place.
Well,
And
I know Darren H has been studying the possibility of having British tree frogs. By the way, we are talking about Hyla arborea,
Yes, we are,
European green tree frog.
Yeah, Darren Nash has written quite a long report available online, reporting a number of amphibians and reptiles that really could be classified as not introductions but native British, and the tree frog is included in one of our native species, although it's been overlooked.
Well, the most high profile of these native species, which may or may not be native species, is of course the pool frog.
Yeah.
Because in all the books written when you and I were boys about British natural history, it said that there were 3 species of frog found in Britain. There was the common frog, Rana temporaria. There was the edible frog, and there was the marsh frog. But it was only fairly recently that it was discovered that the edible frog is actually not a normal species. Although it has a binomial classification, it is actually a complex interaggressive hybrid between marsh frogs and pool frogs. And until very recently, nobody had any idea that there were pool frogs in Britain. And in one of the most tragic bits of cryptozoology, at least British cryptozoology, the last ever British native pool frog was found living a solitary existence in a pond somewhere in East Anglia. I can't remember where exactly. But because there are edible frogs in Britain, it proves that the pool frog must, once upon a time, have been very widespread. And I agree with Darren Naish. I think that the odds are that the European green tree frog has been found naturally in the New Forest, and I believe that it's quite likely that it was found naturally in Essex. But of course, Epping Forest has got other weird things in it, hasn't it?
There have been reports of coyotes or small jackals in Epping Forest, not recently, but we're talking back in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. And I think one of these coyotes was sent to London Zoo or the Zoological Gardens. I featured this in an early issue of Flying Snake magazine with help of my friend Bob Skinner.
Well, there was at least one described as, and I think this is in Bob Rickard and John Michel's book Living Wonders, but I'm not 100% certain. There was at least one described as a timber wolf, which was shot in Epping in late 1930s, 20th century.
Yeah.
And as anyone who was at the last Weird Weekend will know, I have been an acquaintance of the ex-lead singer of Crass, a guy called Steve Ignorant. I think now we should refer to the words of an old Essex folk song. Do they owe us a living?
Course they do, course they do.
Owe us a living?
Course they do, course they do.
Owe us a living? Course they...
That's enough, boys. This is meant to be a family show.
Steve Ignorant, who is a very, very sweet guy, and as anybody who knows anything about the history of British anarcho-punk music will be aware, lived for many, many years in Ongar, just outside Epping Forest, and I've been meaning for years to get him to go and check out the Epping Town Hall, which is where the stuffed remains of this poor unfortunate timber wolf is supposed to have lived. But there are other things there as well. There were reports in the early 70s of beavers, whether they were European beavers or Canadian beavers, I don't know, but beavers in Epping Forest, and these totally predated the accounts of beavers which are now getting more and more common around lots of Britain in the second and third decades of the 21st century. But this was 50, 60 years ago. And so Epping Forest is one of these weird places. Why do you think, Richard, that some places are weirder than others?
I think some places become kind of Fortean windows or spaces for weird phenomena to congregate. Take the Forest of Dean. You've got reports of mystery cats. I can know of at least one report of a wolf in the Forest of Dean. Wild boar. Some places seem to attract weird phenomena at Warminster, as in the UFOs. Warminster was a focal point of UFOs and possibly other weird phenomena as well. I don't really know why it happens.
Perfect.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And there's the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, asks me to remind you all, always press the notification bell, otherwise you'll never find out when the next show's going to be.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
And that's about it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who's been involved in this episode, particularly Richard Freeman, Richard Muirhead, and the lovely Miss Isabel. Before we go, I want to show you this. While I was in the hospital last week, and by the way, I did go in, as I think I said earlier, to the cardiac unit, but they found out that they could deal with my heart problems by adjusting the medication, which I think they've done successfully, although I'm still a bit wobbly. The dear girls, that was Miss Karen and Miss Judy, framed this. This is a certificate which was sent to me by the lovely Katie Elizabeth, making me an honorary member of the International Dracontology Alliance. It arrived weeks ago, but it's been in a box on my court cupboard waiting for me to get a frame the right size to hold it, because American paper and British paper are different sizes. And I finally got one. Here it is. Thank you very much, Katie. I love you dearly and I'm very, very honoured. I'm going to be back on Wednesday. What am I going to be talking about on Wednesday? Well, I can tell you what I'm going to be talking about on Wednesday. I'm going to be... What?
Sorry,
What did you say?
I said, crikey, you can tell us what you're going to be talking about this time.
Yes, I have just got the latest issue of the Butterfly Conservation Journal, and there's an awful lot of stuff of Fortean interest in there, so I am doing two 15-minute shows, one next Wednesday and one the week after, about the contents of this particularly lovely journal, and I'm also going off on various tangents about it. I'll be back next Saturday. What am I going to be talking about next Saturday? I have no idea because we haven't filmed it yet. But one thing I do know... Are you ready, Mr. McCrinnan?
I am indeed, Mr. Downs.
If you're there or watching the show and I'm there answering questions, doing the live chat and all the other weird things I do, excuse me, Richard, stop making noises. Richard Muirhead is in the background making weird noises.
Well, it's
Noises.
Facebook, actually.
It was some videos on Facebook he'd forgotten and was doing them. But if I'm there, Mr. McCrinnan, doing the live chat and all the other things, and you're there watching Mr. McCrinnan,
Yes, Mr. Downs.
I'll be seeing you